Today, we are tackling something of a paradox. We're looking at a massive public health challenge that's been created really by its own success. We're talking about the rapid rise of clinical psychedelic research and the new, very fragile infrastructure that's struggling to keep up. We're calling it the psychedelic safety net.
It's more than a challenge, I think. It's a critical inflection point. What we're seeing is a public health phenomenon that is just completely outrunning the regulatory clock. So on one hand, you have these incredibly high-profile institutions, like Johns Hopkins, proving the profound therapeutic benefits of compounds like psilocybin.
Right, the stuff that's all over the news.
Exactly. But on the other hand, these same substances remain largely illegal, yet their cultural acceptance, and more importantly, their use, is just skyrocketing.
And that tension. That's really the core of our deep dive today, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
these substances are still prohibited, the essential support you'd expect to see, it doesn't come from hospitals or, traditional mental health clinics.
Yeah. It can't.
It can't. So instead, it falls entirely to these specialized, often volunteer-run community organizations. Our mission today is to understand exactly why this support system, these new, and as we'll see, highly rigorous first responders, is such a necessity right now. And also how they operate in this legal gray area and the precarious policy and financial challenges they're facing just trying to stay afloat.
And our sources for this give us a really comprehensive view of this intersection. We've pulled together cutting-edge academic reports, particularly from the renowned Johns Hopkins University Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research. We also have hard epidemiological data from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, NID, and then operational deep dives into these specialized crisis and harm reduction organizations like the Fireside Project and the Zendo Project.
So if you take away one big picture insight from our conversation today, let it be this. The current psychedelic boom has created a critical, and I mean a validated, public health necessity for specialized support. The conventional mental health system, we're talking ERs, licensed therapists who are bound by federal law, is fundamentally ill-equipped.
Or legally constrained.
Right, legally constrained from handling the unique psychological crises that can come from these non-ordinary states of consciousness. This infrastructure gap is real, and the community is rising to fill it.
That's the perfect way to put it.
Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand the need for this infrastructure, we have to start with the proof. Let's look at the quantifiable evidence of this surge in use. We need to establish that this is not a fringe topic anymore. This is a measurable shift.
Precisely. And the data from Anita, it really validates that this cultural shift is widespread. It's not just one small group. We've seen a clear, measurable rise in substance use across the adult population, and the demographic shift here is really the key. Specifically, marijuana and hallucinogen use among adults aged 35 to 50 reached historic highs in 2022.
35 to 50, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
That means people who are established in their careers, who are likely raising families, they are engaging with these compounds at levels that have never been recorded before.
Exactly. It demonstrates a profound mainstreaming effect. It's moving well beyond the traditional early adopter, the young adult experimenter.
So why do you think that is? Why that age group specifically?
Well, this cohort, the 35 to 50-year-olds, are engaging at these unprecedented levels. And I think we can attribute this partly to the sheer volume of positive media coverage. A lot of that coverage is spurred by the clinical research we're going to talk about. It suggests these are tools for personal development or mental wellness, not just drugs of abuse. So for a middle-aged professional, it just completely changes the perceived risk-reward calculation.
And when we drill down into the younger demographic, the people we might expect to be using these, the shift gets even more instructive for public health policy.
It does. If we look at young adults, so aged 18 to 24, the usage metrics reveal a really crucial nuance. The past year use of LSD, it actually remained relatively consistent between 2018 and 2021. It only shifted narrowly from 3.7% to 4.2%.
So not a huge jump there.
No, that stability is actually surprising. However, the use of non-LSD hallucinogens nearly doubled in the exact same period. It rocketed from 3.4% to 6.6%.
Wow, okay. That difference is striking. So why should we care so much about that distinction? LSD versus non-LSD hallucinogens. What's in that second bucket?
That second category is dominated by compounds like psilocybin. That's the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. And this is the compound that is most frequently featured in all the therapeutic studies coming out of places like Johns Hopkins. So the data strongly suggests that public behavior is being directly influenced by the positive narrative coming out of the lab. People aren't necessarily flocking to the classic 1960s psychedelic. They're flocking to the substance that science is now validating as having real therapeutic potential.
So the therapeutic research creates this sort of halo effect that increases cultural acceptability.
Yeah.
But that cultural acceptability, when it's not matched with legal or medical infrastructure, that's where the unintended consequences come in.
Precisely. And we've seen this movie before. We saw this phenomenon play out so clearly with the gradual legalization of cannabis across the U.S.
Oh.
Researchers found that legalization was associated not just with increased adult use, but also with a 13% greater odds of past-month marijuana use among youth. And subsequently, cannabis use disorders also increased.
So if psychedelics follow that same trend, where increased access and less stigma come way before any formal regulation.
Then we need robust, tailored public health responses ready right now to manage the surge in use and, frankly, misuse.
And speaking of that therapeutic research that is driving this entire boom, we have to start with the academic engine that's powering it all. Johns Hopkins University. Their Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research is, it's arguably the single most important institution in the world driving this change.
They are the cornerstone, not just of the current research, but of its very existence in the modern era. We often forget that this research effectively just ended in the U.S. in the late 1960s, when these substances were classified as Schedule 1. JHU was the first institution in the U.S. to receive regulatory approval back in 2000 to restart psychedelics research in healthy volunteers. And that one single approval was the trickle that eventually became the flood we're seeing today.
Okay, so let's delve into their specific transformative findings on psilocybin. Because the results they're getting across different disorders, they're not just promising, they are fundamentally challenging decades of conventional psychiatric wisdom.
The evidence base is becoming incredibly solid. Just look at major depressive disorder. JHU studies found that just 1 to 2 sessions of psilocybin-assisted therapy can rapidly and dramatically reduce depressive symptoms.
And when you say rapidly, what does that mean in this context?
We are talking about substantial antidepressant effects that are noticeable within days or weeks, and that last for up to a year. And this is even for individuals who had previously failed to respond to multiple traditional treatments, SSRIs, talk therapy, the works. The most striking metric for me is this. Half of the participants in one of their major studies achieved clinical remission.
Clinical remission. That's a really loaded term in psychiatry. Could you explain what that actually means for a person?
It means they no longer met the clinical criteria for depression on standardized, recognized scales. They are, for all intents and purposes, considered non-depressed. And if you think about the conventional approach to severe depression, it often involves years of daily medication with really mixed success. But JHU demonstrated these durable, dramatic results following a highly concentrated, contained experience. It just suggests a completely different mechanism of action.
It's moving beyond just managing symptoms to
a genuine psychological overhaul, yes.
And their research shows this isn't just siloed to mood disorders, right? It applies elsewhere.
Correct. The research also shows really strong promise for addiction and substance use. Psilocybin has demonstrated efficacy in helping longtime smokers quit, with follow-up studies showing some of the highest long-term success rates ever recorded in nicotine addiction treatment. And it also shows promise in treating alcohol use disorder, specifically in reducing alcohol consumption and misuse.
I remember reading a comment from researcher Matthew Johnson at JHU, and he pointed out that psilocybin seems to help with a range of addictions, which suggests it's not just about quelling cravings. What's the distinction he's making there?
That's where the therapeutic role of the subjective experience, the trip, really comes into play. Conventional addiction treatment often focuses on managing the craving or the physical dependence. What Johnson suggests is that psilocybin helps the individual wrestle with the deeper psychological questions that are at the heart of their addiction. The identity they hold as an addict, the trauma they might be trying to medicate, or the narrative they feel trapped inside. It allows the individual to fundamentally challenge and then shift their own self-identity from smoker to non-smoker.
The third major area, which I think is one of the most moving, involved end-of-life anxiety.
That was the landmark 2016 JHU study. It involved cancer patients who were facing life-threatening diagnoses. They found that 80% of those who received a high dose of psilocybin felt profoundly less anxious and depressed. And these anxiety-reducing effects were shown to endure for months, which, for someone in that position, is just an immense gift of solace.
And there was a critical finding in that study about the experience itself, wasn't there?
There was. The study highlighted that the subjective features of a mystical or a peak experience, feelings of interconnectedness, unity, sacredness, they weren't just side effects. They were identified as a mediating factor and a predictor of the long-term changes. The more profound the experience, the better the outcome.
This research has just fundamentally shifted the conversation from drugs are bad to these are powerful tools that require respect. And it leads us directly to the neuroscientific theory that's underpinning all this change, the reset button theory.
And this is where it gets really interesting from a biological perspective.
Huh.
A JHU researcher named Gould Dillon, who has done some fascinating work studying neuroplasticity in different species, suggests that all classic psychedelics share a common mechanism. They have the ability to temporarily reopen what's called a critical period in the brain.
Okay, define that critical period again for us and explain why reopening it is so groundbreaking.
A critical period is a temporary developmental window, think of early childhood, when the brain is exceptionally malleable, it's plastic. During this time, the brain is highly susceptible to learning, adapting, forming new circuits in response to its environment. Once that window closes, typically in late adolescence or early adulthood, the brain becomes far more rigid. And that's why changing entrenched behaviors or deeply held beliefs becomes so difficult later in life.
So psychedelics don't just introduce neuroplasticity, they temporarily revert the brain back to a super malleable, almost childlike state of learning.
Exactly. This temporary reversion, this burst of neuroplasticity, is likely the mechanism that allows for such profound therapeutic action. Another JHU researcher, Albert Garcia-Romeu, points out that this sets the stage for the intense psychedelic experience to serve as a marker of an identity shift. It gives the person the neural capacity to move past these previously insurmountable barriers.
But Dr. Dillon introduces a crucial nuance here. She cautions against the simple interpretation that just plasticity equals cure. And this is a key insight that separates therapeutic psychedelics from addictive substances.
This is the intellectual deep dive moment right here. Dillon cautions against relying too much on the term psychoplastogen, which simply means something that induces plasticity, and why? Because known addictive drugs, cocaine, heroin, amphetamine, alcohol, nicotine, are also robust inducers of plasticity. If plasticity alone were the cure, we'd find healing in cocaine use, and, well, clearly we do not.
So if it's not the plasticity alone, what is the critical ingredient? What ensures the brain uses that open window for positive change rather than just reinforcing old addictive pathways?
It seems to be the acute subjective experience, the content of the trip itself. The intense emotional, cognitive, and often mystical content of that experience provides the meaning and the narrative framework for change. So the neuroplasticity provides the brain with the capacity to change, but the subjective experience, that highly structured, often deeply emotional confrontation with yourself or with reality, provides the direction for that change. You have to confront the trauma or the source of the addiction or the fear of death for the brain to utilize its newfound malleability to forge a new path.
Which reinforces the conclusion from researchers like David Yedden and the late Roland Griffiths at JHU. They contend that the experience is necessary for the full benefit. You can't just get the molecule without the mind-altering journey.
And that, in turn, is precisely why expert caution is so paramount when we talk about unsupervised use. Frederick Barrett, the director of the JHU Center, he stresses the need for rigorous methods because these are powerful drugs, and with great power comes great risk. The power to rapidly reset a system also carries the power to destabilize a fragile one.
And the most serious risk, which we really should not understate for you listening, is triggering a latent mental health crisis in vulnerable people.
Absolutely. JHU's Albert Garcia-Romeu points out that individuals with a family history of serious psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, they face the possibility that a high-dose experience could trigger long-lasting mental health issues that might otherwise have remained latent or manageable.
Garcia-Romeu used a really powerful analogy to describe the danger of using these substances without supervision.
He did. He warned that using psychedelics on the street in an uncontrolled setting is like getting severely drunk in a foreign city. You're in a state of extreme vulnerability, your mental defenses are compromised, and you could get taken advantage of, experience severe disorientation, or get into a physical accident. The substance itself isn't the only risk. The environment, the setting, they are huge factors.
So the lab tells us these molecules are immensely powerful and require rigorous controls. But outside the lab, thousands of people are engaging with this power without any safety net. And that gap between the promising therapeutic research and the public peril is precisely what forces us to look at this critical infrastructure vulnerability.
And that gap, what we're calling the critical infrastructural vulnerability, is where our conversation must now pivot. The academic engine has created this massive public demand, but the persistence of the legal framework has functionally prevented the conventional medical system from meeting that demand safely.
Let's elaborate on that clinical constraint. If a licensed therapist is trained in this kind of work, in integration, why can't they just offer those services openly? What's stopping them?
The issue is a combination of legal and ethical constraints that are all tied to their professional license. Traditional clinicians, they're bound by very strict state and federal regulations, and they are highly hesitant to offer formal preparation or integration support if they believe it facilitates illegal drug use. They worry that assisting with activities that are federally prohibited, even indirectly like helping a patient process an experience they had at home, could be interpreted as contributing to illegal activity.
And that could jeopardize their license.
It could jeopardize their professional licensure, their insurance, or their employment. It's a huge professional risk.
So licensed professionals are essentially caught between their ethical desire to help patients who are using these substances for growth and the legal mandate to avoid anything that could be seen as encouraging illegal activity.
It creates an enormous vacuum of support. You have a public with an increasing likelihood of using these high-potency substances, a known risk of challenging experiences, and then you have licensed professionals who are legally constrained from offering the appropriate help. This ethical and legal dilemma is what necessitates the creation of these specialized community-based nonprofits. They operate under a clear harm reduction framework, which doesn't require abstinence and sits outside that licensed medical system.
And this is where we introduce the Fireside Project, which has pioneered a really remarkable and scalable solution. Is a psychedelic support hotline.
Fireside Project is the quintessential specialized first responder. They address the fundamental need for real-time, non-directive crisis management. You can reach them via phone and text at 623-473-7433. And their core service philosophy is profound because it addresses the core fear of isolation. They assure a person they will never have to be alone with a psychedelic experience ever again.
We mentioned the demand validation for this earlier, but it really bears repeating. The scale of their service proves this is an essential public utility.
It's staggering. They have handled over 26,000 calls and texts. To put that in perspective, that is a massive, validated public need for immediate support, a need that exists entirely outside of clinical trials or emergency rooms. This high volume proves that challenging, crisis-level experiences are a common reality in this non-clinical landscape. And without Fireside, those 26,000 calls might have ended up in emergency rooms, maybe involving law enforcement, or just resulting in serious psychological trauma.
And what does that called data tell us? What are the crises that people are calling about?
They reveal some pretty common patterns. Many callers struggle with sensory overload, just feeling completely overwhelmed, or even physical discomfort. They also report high rates of paranoia, confusion over dosage, or these deep existential crises, what you might call the classic bad trip. But crucially, Fireside reports that approximately 10% of their contacts originate from people who are tripping for the very first time.
That 10% figure. That's a direct indicator of the cultural shift we were just talking about. People hear about the science, they decide to try it, and they walk into an incredibly powerful experience with absolutely no preparation.
Exactly. They lack the essential components of set and setting, the mental preparation and the physical environment that JHU research emphasizes as so critical. They are the definition of vulnerable, which is why Fireside's non-judgmental presence is so crucial.
But this is not just a casual, peer conversation. We need to emphasize the rigor and professionalism of their volunteers. This isn't just a friend talking you down.
No, that is the key distinction that separates this from amateur attempts at support. Fireside's volunteers undergo an incredibly rigorous 30-step, 300-hour certification program. This is then followed by a 1-year apprenticeship and weekly clinical supervision from licensed professionals who oversee the quality of care without being directly involved in the substance use aspect.
Wow, 300 hours of training. What could they possibly be learning that takes that long? What specific skills are they mastering?
It's highly comprehensive. It includes extensive training in active listening and empathetic rapport building. It includes advanced de-escalation tactics that are specifically tailored for altered states of consciousness, ethical boundary setting, trauma-informed care principles, and detailed protocols for when to initiate a referral to emergency services or law enforcement, which is a critical judgment call. They train extensively on something called non-directive redirection, which is the ability to help someone process an intense mental state without imposing the volunteer's own interpretation or agenda on them.
So very sophisticated skill set. Now let's contrast that remote hotline model with the Zendo project, which focuses on physical in-person presence.
The Zendo project operates on a different but equally necessary plane. They focus on physical presence, education, and peer support services delivered primarily at large events like music festivals or transformational gatherings. Their model addresses the acute risks that are inherent in these high-density social environments where psychological crises are common and where traditional medical or security responses might be punitive or just overwhelming.
So Zendo is essentially creating a sanctuary on site, a safe space where people can be held through a difficult experience rather than being thrown out or medically restrained.
Precisely. And they have formalized their knowledge into a structured curriculum, the Sitting and Integration Training, or the SIT course. The course is explicitly rooted in non-directive, trauma-attuned care, with the formalized objective of helping individuals transform difficult psychedelic experiences into opportunities for learning and growth.
Let's get specific. Because for you to understand how Zendo functions, you need to know their core tenets. What are the 4 Zendo principles?
The Zendo principles are the foundation of their operational philosophy, and they really represent best practices in non-clinical psychedelic support.
Lay them out for us. What's the first one?
1. Create a safe space. This is fundamental. It involves ensuring physical comfort, minimizing external stimuli like loud music or bright lights, and establishing a clear, non-threatening environment for the individual.
Okay, that makes sense. Number 2.
2. Sit with difficulty. This is perhaps the most challenging principle. It requires the volunteer not to try to fix the experience, but to stay present with the individual's pain, or their paranoia, or their confusion. It means accepting those difficult emotions as valid and temporary, rather than trying to distract them or minimize what they're feeling.
And the third principle?
3. Talk it through. This focuses on communication, encouraging the individual to process and express their thoughts and feelings during the experience, and helping them reorient if they become too detached from reality.
And 4, the last one.
Focus on integration. This is the forward-looking principle. Even during the crisis itself, the focus is placed on the idea that this difficult experience can be valuable. It helps the individual frame it as an opportunity for learning once they return to an ordinary state of consciousness.
And by teaching these principles, Zendo is scaling out this competency.
They are. And what's particularly significant is that their SIT course offers 12 continuing education credit CEs for licensed mental health professionals. This is a critical bridge. By offering CEs, they legitimize their community-based harm reduction methodologies within the formal, licensed healthcare structure. It helps mainstream therapists integrate this kind of non-directive care into their existing scope of practice, even if they remain legally constrained from administering the drug itself.
So these community organizations are not just reacting to crises, they are creating the new standard for trauma-informed, non-directive care that the license system is now slowly beginning to adopt.
Absolutely. However, this success and this rigor must be paired with the sobering reality we touched on earlier, which is their financial instability. This operational capacity is perpetually threatened by an unstable funding model.
We've established that Fireside Project, which is handling over 26,000 crisis contacts, describes itself as listener-supported.
And that reliance on voluntary contribution is the single greatest threat to this safety infrastructure. For a service that is demonstrably validated by overwhelming demand, a service that is filling an essential public utility need relying on philanthropy just poses an enormous policy risk. If the necessary public support or philanthropic funding collapses, the operational capacity of the safety net could be severely compromised at the precise moment that public need is peaking. It highlights a critical financial misalignment that policymakers simply cannot afford to ignore.
Okay, to understand why Fireside and Zendo are so effective and why they can thrive in this legal gray area while maintaining ethical integrity, we have to look closely at their guiding philosophy. It's called Psychedelic Harm Reduction and Integration, or PHRI. What exactly defines this clinical approach?
PHRI is a highly sophisticated, comprehensive clinical approach. It's designed for working with patients who are using or considering using psychedelics in any context, whether that's legally in a trial or illegally in a ceremony. It's defined as a trans-theoretical and trans-diagnostic clinical approach.
Okay, those are heavy clinical terms. For you listening, we need to break down what trans-theoretical and trans-diagnostic actually mean for the patient experience.
It's simpler than it sounds. Trans-theoretical just means the clinician doesn't rely solely on one specific school of therapy. They pull from many. So unlike, say, a strict cognitive behavioral therapist, a PHRI clinician might integrate mindfulness, psychodynamics, and classic talk therapy. The approach is flexible and customized, using whatever tool best suits the person's needs during their preparation or their integration.
And transdiagnostic, does that mean the therapy is the same whether the patient has depression, PTSD, or general anxiety?
It means the clinician treats the person, not the label. A transdiagnostic approach recognizes that psychological distress often overlaps and isn't neatly confined to one formal diagnosis. So the PHRI approach aims to provide support and context for the profound experience, regardless of what the patient's formal clinical diagnosis might be.
This sounds fundamentally different from traditional therapy.
It is, because PHRI represents a critical philosophical shift. It moves away from assessment that's limited only to negative outcomes, and it completely rejects the rigid, traditional, abstinence-based paradigms of addiction treatment. And crucially, it guides the clinical work without requiring the clinician to prescribe or administer the drug. That is the safety line that protects licensed practitioners.
That move away from abstinence only seems foundational to its success in working with people who use illegal substances. It meets them where they are.
It does. The PHRI model's principles are heavily derived from something called integrative harm reduction psychotherapy, or IHRP, which was developed by Dr. Andrew Tatarski at the Center for Optimal Living. IHRP is designed specifically to meet people at their current stage of engagement with a substance.
How does IHRP apply that core principle of collaboration in a session?
The cornerstone is the collaborative therapeutic relationship that starts where the person is. IHRP clinicians recognize that not everyone is ready for or even desires complete abstinence at the onset of treatment. So the core expertise of this approach is helping people figure out whether moderation, risk reduction, or abstinence is the appropriate and achievable path for them.
And this tailored solution is far more effective and less alienating than a blanket mandate to just quit now and forever, which often drives people away from seeking help entirely.
Alan Marlett, who was a leading figure in the field of harm reduction, offered a really profound definition of this approach. It speaks to the human element involved.
It's a perfect distillation. Marlett stated that harm reduction is humane because you have to meet people on their own terms rather than confronting them on yours. It's pragmatic because harm reduction accepts substance use as a fact of life and recognizes its role as a way of coping with the consequences of social problems. It's an acknowledgement that you cannot just remove a person's primary coping mechanism until other, healthier coping mechanisms are securely in place.
So let's translate that non-judgmental stance into practical action. What does a PHRI therapist do when working with a patient who is considering a psychedelic experience?
The therapist's role is to provide a supportive and non-judgmental container for the patient's exploration. So in the preparation phase, the therapist is highly non-directive, but extremely thorough. They'll inquire extensively about the patient's motivations, their detailed plan for the experience, including the setting, sitting arrangements, emergency contacts, their specific goals, and the steps they envision to integrate the experience afterward.
And they have to discuss alternatives too, correct?
Yes, that's a key element. Inquiring about whether the patient has considered alternative non-pharmacological methods for accessing non-ordinary states. Things like holotropic breathwork or prolonged meditation or sensory deprivation. This ensures the patient's making a fully informed choice, considering options that don't carry the legal or acute pharmacological risks.
And what about the cardinal rule of non-direction? When can the clinician actually intervene or voice a concern?
The clinician has to maintain a very strict line. They neither encourage nor discourage psychedelic use. They're not cheerleaders, but they're not police either. They are permitted to voice concerns only if the intended use clearly presents a significant risk of harm. For example, a high dose mixed with contraindicated medications. But even when they voice these concerns, it has to be done without attaching judgment to the patient's ultimate choice. This strict neutrality preserves the essential therapeutic alliance, which is vital.
There is an ongoing and I think a vital debate within the PHRI field about this, about the necessity of a therapist's own experiential knowledge or firsthand experience in these non-ordinary states. If the goal is to integrate a profound subjective experience, should the therapist have navigated one themselves?
This is perhaps the deepest challenge in training psychedelic therapists right now. Some within the field strongly argue that firsthand experience in a non-ordinary state of consciousness is a crucial training element. They contend it enhances a provider's competence by giving them a map of the territory, the ability to genuinely comprehend the nonlinear, often bizarre or profoundly mystical narratives their patients might bring back.
And there's a benefit for the therapist's own wellness, too, I've heard.
Absolutely. The argument suggests that having undergone a profound experience can promote the provider's own mental wellness and reduce burnout, which is a significant concern given the high rates of mental health struggles and self-medication among healthcare professionals who fear seeking formal treatment because of licensure concerns.
But the moment a therapist admits to that experiential knowledge, they invite a completely different kind of scrutiny.
That's the tension. Therapists with firsthand experience might face scrutiny for bias, the risk of projecting their own positive or negative experience onto the patient, leading to a loss of therapeutic neutrality. Conversely, the naive therapist, one who has only read the textbooks, may face criticism for a fundamental lack of genuine understanding of the depth and, frankly, the often terrifying nature of the experiences their patients are describing. It is a deeply challenging balance between the need for clinical objectivity and the need for deep, authentic empathy.
We've focused extensively on the specialized infrastructure Fireside and Zendo that addresses these specific psychedelic crises. But it is crucial to remember that this specialized support relies on and exists within a much broader, robust network of general crisis and mental health resources across the country.
Yes, we must ensure that you, the listener, have these resources clearly laid out. These specialized psychedelic services often integrate with or refer to these traditional hotlines when a crisis exceeds their peer support mandate.
And we have to emphasize this with the utmost seriousness. If you are in a crisis, if you or any other person may be in immediate danger or are experiencing a mental health emergency, you must immediately call 911 in the USA or your local emergency resources.
Beyond immediate emergency services, here is the essential network of general crisis and mental health support, which is 247, free and confidential.
The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is available 24/7, and it's free and confidential. The number is 800-273-8255. They provide prevention and crisis resources for anyone in distress, connecting you to a network of crisis centers nationwide.
For substance abuse and general mental health resource referrals, there's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA's National Helpline. It's a free, confidential 247, 365-day-a-year treatment referral and information service in both English and Spanish. That number is 800-662-HELP. That's 4357.
The National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, has a helpline. It's available Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time at 800-950-NAMI. That's 6264. It provides a free nationwide peer support service offering information and resource referrals. But remember, the NAMI helpline is explicitly not a crisis line or a suicide prevention line. It's a peer support resource.
For targeted support, the Veterans Crisis Line can be reached by calling 800-273-8255 and then pressing 1. They offer connection to qualified responders, many of whom are veterans themselves.
The LGBT National Hotline is available at 888-843-4564. It offers anonymous and confidential peer support and connection to the largest LGBTQ resource database in the U.S.
For men who have experienced unwanted or abusive sexual experiences, the organization 1 in 6 provides information and support resources for men, their family members, and service providers.
The National Domestic Violence Hotline provides 247 confidential support, including text and chat options at 800-799-SAFE-E, that's 7233.
And finally, the National Sexual Assault Telephone Hotline, run by RAIN, can be reached at 800-656-HOPE, that's 4673. This number routes callers to a local RAIN affiliate for confidential support, help finding a local health facility for survivors, and referrals for long-term support.
Beyond crisis support, we also need to recognize the essential organizations that are focused on drug education and specific harm reduction resources operating within that philosophical framework we just detailed.
These groups provide non-judgmental, factual information, which is just central to informed decision-making. Dance Safe is a public health organization promoting health and safety in nightlife, and they operate on principles of harm reduction and peer-based education. They're famous for bringing adulterant screening or pill testing to the U.S. rave community. Crucially, they neither condone nor condemn drug use. They just acknowledge its reality.
And for the purely informational side, we have these massive online libraries.
Earwood is a member-supported organization that provides access to reliable, non-judgmental information about psychoactive substances. They aim for truth, accuracy, and integrity in their publishing. Similarly, Blue Light is an international online harm reduction community that hosts frank discussion and recovery communities, accepting that drug use will always exist.
For immediate digital peer support that parallels the Fireside Project, there's another key resource you should know about.
That is tripsit.me. They provide 24/7 live chat support and a detailed drug information wiki. They are there to provide guidance and support to reduce the risks associated with reckless or uninformed consumption, offering a digital space for users who may be having a hard time while under the influence.
And finally, we have to mention the organizations that are focused on the systemic policy change that is necessary to support this entire safety net.
Two critical organizations are reshaping the legal and political landscape. First is Students for Sensible Drug Policy, or SSDP. It's a global youth-led network dedicated to ending the war on drugs. They promote sensible policies, honest education, and harm reduction, respecting the right of individuals to make decisions about their own health and well-being.
And the Drug Policy Alliance, or DPA.
The DPA advocates for policies that are grounded in science, compassion, health, and human rights. Their explicit mission is to advance policies that best reduce the harms of both drug use and drug prohibition, promoting services like treatment on demand and reality-based drug education.
Okay, now that we've established the scale of the public need, the scientific validation from Johns Hopkins, and the rigor of the nonprofit response from Fireside and Zendo, we have to return to the central policy challenge, ensuring the sustainability and financial security of these essential, specialized first responders.
We're back to that critical funding gap. Fireside Project is a demonstrably essential public utility, validated by handling over 26,000 crisis contacts, yet they are reliant on community donations, that listener-supported model.
And that dependence is financially precarious. I mean, it's just not sustainable for an essential public health function, is it?
Not at all. Reliance on voluntary contributions for a critical safety net poses a profound policy risk. If philanthropic funding collapses, and history shows it can be cyclical and unreliable, the support line's operational capacity is compromised at the exact moment public need is peaking. We simply cannot rely on the goodwill of donors to sustain a necessary high-volume public safety function.
So we have a legal constraint preventing the license system from providing help, and a financial constraint preventing the specialized peer support system from scaling reliably. Policy change is the only way to resolve this.
Absolutely. The sustained safety of the public demands a decisive policy shift from regulatory bodies and public health funders. We need recommendations that formally recognize and fund this infrastructure.
Let's start with the first recommendation, formal recognition. What does that actually look like in practice for organizations like Fireside and Zendo?
It means regulatory bodies must formally recognize these specialized psychedelic support lines and event services as critical infrastructure and an essential public health function. This means treating them less like a charity and more like a utility like the 988 crisis line, but with a specialized mandate. Formal recognition justifies state and federal support because the sheer volume of demand and their integration alongside traditional crisis lines already justifies this status.
And formal recognition must be quickly paired with stabilizing the financial model. How can policy achieve stable, long-term funding without relying on that fluctuating charity model?
Policy needs to explore dedicated public funding streams. And there's a major precedent for this in states that have legalized cannabis. In places like Colorado or Oregon, taxes levied on legal cannabis sales are allocated specifically to public health initiatives, mental health treatment, or youth prevention programs. Similar structures could be implemented for burgeoning legal psychedelic markets, like psilocybin or MDMA in therapy, or by designating these support services as recipients of specific public health grants tied to harm reduction outcomes.
But tying mental health funding to fluctuating drug markets, that sounds a bit risky. What's the counterpoint or the necessary safeguard there?
That's a crucial policy consideration. While taxes on legal sales offer a politically palatable funding source, the risk is that if the market fluctuates or shrinks, the essential service loses its support. Therefore, policy has to ensure that this funding is designated as a baseline subsidy designed to stabilize operations and must be paired with public health grant funding that is independent of market performance, ensuring true stability.
The third recommendation relates to formalizing the existing high-quality training that's provided by groups like Fireside and Zendo. How do we integrate that professionalism into the regulated system?
This is all about credentialing and professionalization. We noted that Fireside Project utilizes a high-rigor, 300-hour certification program. States and professional licensing boards should utilize these existing models as the basis for creating official certification or licensure pathways for psychedelic peer support specialists.
That sounds like creating a whole new category of mental health provider, a paraprofessional who works exclusively in this harm reduction space.
Exactly. It would formalize this specialized role and integrate it into the wider mental health spectrum. It would give consumers confidence, it would provide accountability, and critically, it would create a protected labor pool that could be formally compensated. It moves peer support out of the volunteer domain and into a legitimate, recognized career path.
But there's a massive risk in regulation, isn't there? The risk of compromising the philosophy of care. If the state funds the service, they might impose constraints that violate the non-judgmental, non-directive principles that make the service so effective in the first place.
That tension has to be addressed head-on in the policy language. Future regulation must govern the quality and safety of service delivery, ensuring standards in training, supervision, and trauma-informed care are met without imposing constraints on the fundamental, non-directive, non-judgmental philosophy of care. That core philosophy is key to their effectiveness because they serve users operating outside of legal settings. If regulation attempts to turn these safety lines into a policing body or requires them to report users, they will immediately lose the trust of the community they were created to serve, and the safety net will just dissolve.
So at the end of the day, the successful and safe evolution of psychedelics into the mainstream.
It fundamentally depends on supporting and formalizing this harm reduction infrastructure. Failure to financially secure and formally recognize these first responders risks undermining all the positive clinical outcomes being sought in research by neglecting the safety and well-being of the public already engaging with these powerful substances.
This deep dive has provided crucial context for understanding the current mental health landscape, which really is defined by this tension between prohibition and promise. We saw the undeniable scientific validation coming from institutions like Johns Hopkins, demonstrating psilocybin's dramatic and lasting effects on the neural mechanisms governing depression, anxiety, and addiction by temporarily reopening the brain's critical learning period.
We analyzed the quantifiable surge in use through that INIDA data, highlighting the mainstreaming effect among older adults and the targeted rise in non-LSD hallucinogens, which directly validates the rising need for support. And we profiled the indispensable safety net, that specialized peer support infrastructure provided by Fireside Project and Zendo Project, filling the gap left by conventional systems that are legally constrained.
For you, the listener, what this means is recognizing that the mental health revolution is happening not just in the lab, but in the community, and that the continued success of the science relies entirely on the stability of that community-based safety net.
And here's where it gets really interesting and, I think, provocative for you to consider. If, as these Johns Hopkins researchers suggest, the deepest, most enduring forms of human healing require confronting and integrating profound, non-ordinary experiences that temporarily reset the brain's capacity for learning, then the experience itself is indispensable. As society moves toward medicalization, the challenge is ensuring that the scientific rigor, the data, and the psychological necessity, the powerful subjective experience, remain inextricably linked, and that the crucial safety net for those profound experiences remains strong, stable, and financially secured by policy, not just by goodwill.